get started, dig into this menu, who smokes by a show of hands? Who smokes meat? Who has smokers at the house? Like 1, 2, 3, 4. All my smokers from they edible. And I said, okay. And then none of y'all smoke. Y'all just go out to restaurants all the time. I'm just joking. I'm just joking.
No, we buy it from you.
Thanks, Mom. This is awfully nice of you to say. I gave her $5.17. You know, but yeah. So if you guys have any questions about smokers, I haven't smoked with all the smokers, but I've smoked with like the Egg, you know, Traeger. Yeah, obviously my pets. I've done Weber. That's probably my favorite smoker to smoke with. Out of even the ones that I own. I just have so much appreciation for a Weber. It's like the Cadillac of grills. Yeah, so we can talk about that too at some point. Yeah, so let's dig into it, right? So today's menu, I'm sorry, this is my sous chef, assistant chef, kick body, kick girl, Tracy, and all right, so, but today's menu, we're gonna have some, I'm gonna talk about some rib tips, we're gonna talk about some Mississippi smoked sausage, and we are also gonna talk about some chicken drumsticks. So I'm going to break down that menu and then coleslaw. So with the coleslaw that we do, I'm originally from Mississippi, Greenville, Mississippi, the Queen of the Delta. And the coleslaw that I enjoy to do, which I don't eat coleslaw, but people have told me that. But so that's actually my aunt's coleslaw, Monty Darlene. She's from Memphis, so it's like a mayonnaise base, you know, coleslaw. I know if you go to the Carolinas, they typically do like a more of a vinegar base, and sometimes in Texas. I know how to make any vinegar sauce, mustard sauce. That's not my personal preference. I like sweet because I feel like y'all so sweet, so you should eat something sweet, right? You don't want a bitter taste in your mouth, but that's my opinion. But we all have different palates. So tonight we're gonna have a sweeter sauce. That's the only sauce that I prepared and brought for you guys. So let's dig into it. Before we get started, any questions? All right, no questions. All right, let's go. So questions for you guys is what's a temperature that a chicken should be cooked at or finished off at if you're smoking the chicken?
165.
So we said?
165.
At a girl. 165. So typically if you're going to smoke your chicken drumsticks or smoke dark meat, depending on how many pieces you're cooking up, I say if you have a couple pieces, welcome to the class, baby. If you're going to have like, so the end result of your chicken drumstick, it should look like this, right? So I'm just going to kind of pull and play around with this piece of meat. That sounds so bad. But, that's a good one. You're welcome, Mom. No, I'm just joking. So like when you smoke a piece of chicken, so a lot of times so my Uncle Nip taught me, my father taught me a texture, because like, I'm going to be honest with you guys, like I didn't grow up checking temperatures. I didn't grow up checking as far as like recipes and things of that nature. I got taught by my aunties in the South and my mother, you know, we are from the South. But taking a cooking class, you know, in order to become like licensed, you got to learn all the temperatures, things like that. And which that was really cool as eye-opening for me. Like, man, my mama did this. She should have been an instructor, you know. But my father and my uncle would teach me that when a chicken drum is done, the skin, and I don't know if everybody can see this, but like this is a chicken drum, everybody. But the skin at the tip, it starts to kind of shrivel up a little bit, right? Like, I don't know if you guys ever had, they call them chicken pops or whatever. A lot of times people make them at festivals. I used to do festivals, you know? And what they do is essentially, it's a Haitian style of way of cooking, a Haitian slash Jamaican style of making chicken, right? Like, that's how they make their jerk chicken, a lot of them, you know? Is they actually, when it's raw chicken, they'll peel it back with a fork, right? And then they either grill it or fry it or get it tender, and it looks like a little lollipop, but it's chicken, right? Essentially, that's the same thing with smoking the meat, except for your skin's not going to go all the way up in there, right? Because when I eat chicken, a chicken drum, I like to appreciate, you know, from the top to bottom, right? Just like you go to Popeye, chicken KFC, for those KFC lovers and whatnot. You like to eat the whole chicken, you know, especially for the guys, I feel like a man. Like, hey, baby, I ate 17 pieces of chicken, you know? But once you do that, that lets you know that the chicken's ready, right? But the temperature correct should be at 165, roughly if you're smoking at 225, where I say about, depending on the amounts that you have, roughly should probably be, you know, like we smoke a lot of meat, so we try to gauge the dark meat for at least like, you know, 2.5, 3 hours just for drums, just for to get them to that point before we close the rest of them, okay? Any questions about the chicken? Oh, I'm so sorry, I forgot to demonstrate. So when the chicken's done, you should be able to do this, like kind of pull it and break it up, you know, essentially. So like if this was my mouth, and that would have been delicious, right? So that's the chicken. Any questions about chicken drumsticks, dark meat, chicken breasts, whole chickens, anything?
That smells good, right?
Yeah. Thanks, Mama. I also paid her too. I ain't pay as much as his mama does. Thank you, thank you. Yeah, so that's the chicken. So you're gonna have some of that chicken tonight, okay? I'm gonna put some sauce on it, and just to talk about my barbecue sauce, like I said, the sauce that I brought for tonight, it's a sweeter sauce for those who enjoy sweet. And like I said, if you have questions about making a vinegar sauce, a mustard sauce, I can give you my input on the way that I do it, you know. And that's kind of speaking for us from like Mississippi or whatnot, or even Memphis style, because they've been a huge influence to my style as well. Yeah, so feel free to ask any questions, you know, in regards to that. All right, so pork rib tips. Does everybody know what the rib tip is? Show of hands, you know what the rib tip is. All 7 of you. Yes. All right, so with the rib tip, a rib tip is a cut off of the rib. You know, so you have your St. Louis cut, which is typically like a flatter bone, you know? And then the baby back is a curve. Like, we all love the baby back. I think we love it 95% of the time just because we can say baby to some meat, right? It's like, oh, baby, you can live, baby. You know, but the rib tip is off of the spare, right? So it kind of looks a little weird, but it's actually the same texture of meat, the same flavor, except for it has a gristle in it, right? Some people down south, like my father, he prides himself on eating the gristle because he says he's a man. And he's like, dude, you're just a boy. You don't even like the gristle, boy. But the gristle, if you cook it right, is really tender, you know. It's tender to the point in which you could chew on it. I just feel weird eating on a gristle, you know. But he was born and raised in Mississippi and had some sense to move us up here to Illinois. You know, but if you do enjoy the gristle, by all means, if it's done right, you can eat the gristle. If you ever chew into a gristle that is tough and hard, that doesn't necessarily mean that the meat isn't done right, because sometimes people have a preference of getting the meat to a tender point where you can just eat the meat and you don't need the gristle. You know, that's kind of a pit master's preference on how they cook, you know, but I was taught to, when I cook, to cook it to make it just as soft as a gristle. Because my grandmother, God bless her soul, she loved the gristle. So I'm like, well, Big Mama can't eat the gristle. Well, you know, she's going to throw the whole plate away, you know. So you definitely never wanted that. So that's why I make my gristle soft. So, but if you go to any other barbecue spots and you're like, man, Duke said the gristle's be tough. This knocked out 3 of my teeth. That doesn't mean that they did it wrong or anything to that nature. It just means that as long as the meat is soft and, you know, and you can pull it off, that means that they did a good job. Okay. Any questions about a red tip before I cut up one? All right, there we go. Okay. All right, so with the rib tip, I'm about to display and cut. Hi. Okay. So this is a rib tip. So this would be a tip loin, right? And they do come with little bones. And when you cook it right, you can just pluck out the little bone. You definitely never want to eat a bone. It doesn't matter how long you smoke a bone, you cook a bone, look at the bone. It does not get soft. It's always hard. Do not eat it. All right, come on up there. Yeah. Because of COVID or whatever, so they have restrictions on saying that which is, you know, we're abiding by. Everybody's doing an excellent job. I want to thank you guys for coming and wearing your mask and all that good stuff. But they didn't want everybody to walk around eating, passing food along and such. You know, we have to keep everybody safe. All right, Mom. All right, give that to you.
Here we go.
So that's the tip of a rib tip. She's a great model.
Wow.
Yeah, so what she's eating right there, so it's a texture of a couple of different things, right? So with the tip of the rib tip, you don't necessarily get the gristle, but what you always get in a rib tip is you get the fat, right? Because there's fat all through a rib tip. Just like with brisket, you know, like a lot of times people say, hey, my brisket had fat in it. I was like, well, it's a brisket, man. You know, like even if it's a flat in the point, it's going to have a certain amount of fat, right? And then, you know, depending on which state you go to and all that, Some people say fat is flavor. I'm in between with both. I feel like fat is flavor if you cook it right? If you don't cook it right, just like anything else, it becomes a nightmare. But with the rib tip, you want to appreciate that fat, because with that fat, that leads you into the bite. And when I cook, everything is about the bite, right? Like, I personally believe that you should be able to eat meat. Thanks, Mama, by the way.
Delicious.
Thank you.
And you know what? I'm an old chef, too.
Yeah.
Remember that?
Actually, I remember that. Yeah. No, that was it, no, for sure. No, trip down memory lane. No doubt. But for all of those who understand meat and things of that nature, all meat should be able to stand alone. Well, I'm gonna tell you some jokes really quick before my wife gets here, and y'all just kind of play. Y'all just kind of play stupid for a little bit. So she actually likes to put ketchup on her steaks. I'm like, what are you doing? You know, she get us a nice cut of steak and put ketchup all over before she appreciates the meat. Like, not knocking any sauce, but I feel like whenever you bite into any meat, you should appreciate the meat for the meat being its meat by itself. And then if you want to add some extra stuff onto it, you know, because that's the way you get that palate working, right? Just like for people who love wine, right? First, you don't eat a piece of bread, then drink wine. When you go second wine, you sip the wine, you sniff the wine, you follow the process, right? And then you enjoy, like, you know, some steak, some chicken, some bread, some cheese, or whatever you may like. That's how I feel about all meat, right? You appreciate the meat first, and then doctor it up afterwards and say, hey, I like sauce, or I like this, or whatever, right? But appreciate it, right? So, any questions about the rib tip?
Do you just ask the butcher for that, or do you have to butcher it yourself?
I've done both.
I'm not good at cutting it.
Yeah, so like, if you're going to cut a rib tip up, right? So if you're going to buy a spare rib, I'm going to put this in there, keep it warm, so I'll cut this up for you lovely folks in a little bit. If you're going to cut a rib tip off of a spare rib, so all ribs are about this long, right? So you see spares, and I'm just putting this is about the size, going out for like a rib, for any rib, baby back, St. Louis cut, except for beef ribs. Those are like dinosaur ribs. Aren't they so huge? Like, beef rib this big, like I can feed a village. But as far as pork, with the spare ribs, you can just cut alongside. So whenever you see a pack and they say, hey, like, these are spare ribs, and they're like huge, because a lot of times people at the grocery stores, they mistaken St. Louis cut ribs for beef ribs because they're so big, you know. But literally, when you see that, that's not the size of the rib. That means that they just left the tip on, and I consider that to be a win-win. You know why? Because you get a rib tip and a rib for the price of one. It's like no better deal, right? No better deal.
Now, how long do you have to cook a rib tip to make
Good
it
question.
tender?
Good question. I actually wrote it down, so I took notes. Rib tips you want to do for about. So once again, to kind of go back to the way I was taught to cook, about like touch and feel and smell, you know. So I'm like, oh, that looks good, or whatever. You burn yourself a couple of times, but you know it's red. But typically, we do, because I had to check our chart, how long we smoke our process. So around 4 hours. But once again, we smoke a bunch of meat,
At
you know.
225?
But yeah, but if you're just doing about, a family of 4, a family of 2, just a couple, like, rib tip briskets or whatever, as far as that's the terminology for it, or pork brisket. I would say probably like 2.5, 3 hours,
And then you have to rest that like you do the rest of the meat?
Correct.
Okay.
The resting process is huge, right? Because when you get to, oh, there's my wife, she came, everybody, put your hands together. Oh, thank you, praise, thank you.
Where's your mask?
She told me I didn't have to wear it because I'm teaching the class.
Oh, okay.
Nobody likes to tell.
Okay.
But the resting process is huge, right? Because I wish I would have brought some brisket now because it's a great example. So, has everybody in the room eaten brisket before? Sweet. Has everyone cooked brisket? Anybody cooked brisket? Show of hands. All right. So you never cooked brisket. Put your hand down. You come in line already. You can't. These are good, honest folks in here. So brisket is so beautiful, and when I honestly tell people, I recommend people to cook a brisket first, because it's going to be bad the first time you do it. It's going to, but that's good though, because it's going to teach you to appreciate just not meat, but the process. So with the brisket, when you're cooking, and so depending on the weight of a brisket, you can go from anywhere from, 10, I'll say 10 to 12 hours, you know, smoking a good, like, you know, like a 20 plus pounders, you know. But I've had like this guy, which was this is just ridiculous. Like this guy came to me and told me, he's like, yeah, I smoked a brisket for 24 hours. I said, man, that brisket must have been dry and dead and burnt. I was like, you can't smoke any meat for 24 hours. Who wants meat for 24 hours, right? Nobody. But typically when you do that, that gives you the, you get the flap, right? Mm-hmm. So you should be able to take your fingers when you cook a good brisket. I mean, obviously don't grab it from the smoker. You'll burn, you know, you'll burn yourself. So do not do that, everybody. Do not do that, right? But you should be able to squeeze, like put your fingers into the brisket. The fat on the brisket should feel like just kind of like Play-Doh. You know, everybody like I'm just saying Play-Doh. Our daughter's playing Play-Doh right now, and I'm feeling the texture of it. It just feels like something I'm familiar with. But yeah, but kind of like you get that gushy feeling. You know what I'm saying? But at that point, you rest it, right? Because you don't want to cut into it just yet at that point, because what would happen is the meat is just so fresh and freshly smoked to, if you cut into it, it's going to shred and fall apart on you, right? So when you rest it, it brings it back to its natural form. And when you rest it, that's when you trim it. And that's when you separate, for those who don't separate prior to smoking the brisket, because you know you have a point in the flat. That's when you wait to separate it. Like, that's a process I do. But also there's other pit masters who actually separate the point in the flat prior to smoking it. I actually feel like when you cook it as one, you get all of the flavor, the natural flavor that was meant for, right? Because every brisket, it has, like I was saying, it has a certain level of fat. And that fat is your friend. That sounds so bad. That fat is your friend. I'm like 600 pounds. But with that, you learn to appreciate that, you know? So that's resting a brisket. With chicken and chicken drums, you don't have to rest those. So typically when you get in a brisket sandwich, right, a lot of folks, they prefer to use a flat because the flat is easier, it's more convenient, it doesn't take as much time. Like my daughter can smoke a flat, you know. But I feel like if you want to be like a pit master and like smoke and like brag to your friends, smoke the entire brisket, because the point has majority of the fat, right? Because when you separate them, it's going to have that big chunk of fat cap. Now when you're originally starting a brisket, for those who have cooked briskets, there's a big hard chunk of fat, and you're like, I am not eating that. I'm going to trim it and cut it good, because I tried myself, because I need to prove things myself. I was like, no, man, that could be good fat. It's not good fat. It just gets awkward, you know. It just like you put it in your mouth, you got a lot of your friends like, oh, it's amazing, you know. It's just like it's just bad. So trim that off. So it's going to be hard, but trim it off initially. It does get soft, but it doesn't obtain any flavor. You know, don't trim it all the way off, but you want to trim down to the point where you kind of starting to see the cross patterns of the fat in the meat. You know, so it's like you'll see the lines kind of like doing like little axes, kind of like tic-tac-toe, right? Oh, I didn't hit the hot spot. That's good. So that's when you kind of want to kind of take it off after you're done trimming it. Marinate it however you marinate it. I personally like to use, mustard. I use mustard on all of our meats except for chicken. Some folks use mustard, or down south they'll use like a spicy mustard on their chicken, especially on some fried chickens too, because what mustard does, it contains vinegar, and vinegar is good. I just don't like a strong vinegar like sauce or anything of that nature, because it breaks down the texture of your meat. Whether you're marinating it in vinegar or marinating it in like mustard and putting a dry rub onto it, that's going to soak into the meat, to the flavor, to the breakdown of the meat, and that's going to help your process, whatever that may look like for you. All right, so moving past the brisket, any questions about the brisket or anything like that? All right.
What do you prefer for smoke? What wood?
Yeah, so the woods that we use down there, so we use black walnut, apple, pear, and hickory. This year I did not have as much pear because it just sounds so bad. Like, you're shortage of pear. Like, dude, you're shortage of everything, man. You're here right now. I thought you were going to show up. So there was a shortage of pear wood this year, and so I didn't really get to smoke with pear, but I do prefer to smoke with pear. For those who have smoked with pear wood or pear chips.
I have some. I have never used them.
Oh, use them. They're phenomenal.
Yeah,
They're phenomenal. Pear and apple. If you pear apple and get some pit together, even if you have some chips, it brings out such a good flavor. I know a lot of folks around here use cherry wood. I'm not against cherry wood at all. A lot of pit masters use cherry and hickory together. It does give a good flavor, and actually, like a lot of boys in Kentucky and Kansas, there's their combination. Is a lot of times it's cherry and hit together, and then once again, it's a good flavor. I just don't like cherry by itself. I feel like whenever I taste cherry by itself from whomever smokes it, excuse me, it has a more of a bitter taste. You know, like if you when you first bite into the meat, like it's kind of got a little bitter to it. Like, what's wrong with your smoker, man? But so that's my personal reason why I do not like cherry by itself. All the woods that I listed, I would smoke by those by themselves, and they're even better if you kind of put them together too. So good question about the wood. What wood do you use?
Mesquite.
Ooh, mesquite's hard to find though, man.
For burgers.
Oh, hey, mesquite's really good. If I had a bunch of mesquite, I would smoke mesquite every day. Mesquite is really good. It's just hard to find. It's just hard to find for me at least. So if you got a mesquite tree or something, a connection, see me after class, man. I give you some extra rib tips. Yeah, no, mesquite is phenomenal. Definitely, that's definitely one of my favorite woods. For me, it's just I become accustomed to using the woods that we use because I'm able to get such like large quantities of like large amounts of them. But mesquite, if I had a mesquite connection, that'll be heaven. So but yeah, mesquite's phenomenal. Any other questions before we move on to the next dish?
What do you feel is the hardest meat to smoke?
Oh. Now or when I started off?
When you started?
When I started off, I would say brisket. Brisket was tough, man. Brisket tests everything that you have inside of you, because so the first time I made a brisket, I'm like, brisket will be amazing. So like in my family, the guys are very competitive. But a lot of us play sports, not all of us, but majority of the males in my family cook. Because you gotta, you can't be in a household with one from down south. You gotta know how to cook on the grill. Because that's a manly thing, right? But the true story though, my mom taught my dad how to smoke. It's like the women, y'all teach us everything, but it was a pride thing, right, with the brisket, right? And so I thought I made a hell of a job on the brisket. I'm like, oh man, I'm cutting into it. And that first cut, I was like, this ain't so good. So the outside looked done, and I cut the flat, and it was kind of pink. But not pink like smoke pink, like pink kind of like I just cut into a rare steak.
Yeah.
And everybody was hungry too. I'm like, do you gotta play this off? We gotta play this off good. So I started cutting fast, ready. I get ready for brisket. I'm like, and then my cousin looked at me. His name Rocky. He looked at me. He bit into it and just pulled it with his teeth, like bit and just pulled it, and it kept pulling and pulling. I said, when is it gonna break, man? And so that was tough because I had to learn the process. Right, because I was looking at, because in Mississippi, we're not known for brisket, right? We're known for pork and chicken. So my family had pork and chicken mastered. I would talk, like if I was, I would talk garbage to anybody on pork and chicken, because my family, they put it on us. But brisket, nobody knew what brisket was. Like, when we figured out what burnt ends were, we thought they were sent from God. I'm like, man, these exist, So I had to learn that process. So I spent some time in Texas, right? So when I went down to Texas for a brief little trip, it was like a barbecue tour for me. We went down to visit a buddy of mine and whatnot. I've been down a couple times, and I stopped at these barbecue places, right? And I'm talking with the older guys because it's always some rinky-dink shop, like a gas station or something, that makes the best food, You're like, man, how do you know what you're doing? You're like, I've been doing it for 200 years. But with those places, they taught me a little bit of the process. Then I researched stuff too, right? So then I'm like, okay, so how do I get my brisket soft? And that's when I learned at the 225 to 10 to the 12. You can't fast track, right? That's the one reason why I love to smoke meat. Because with smoking meat, you're forced to follow the process. Because when you don't follow the process, your end result is not going to be good, There's no cheating in smoking. Well, I'm lying. There is cheating. There's an oven. But for people who for people who appreciate smoking in the process, you want to follow it from start to finish. You want to wrap, you want to rush, you want to do everything you need to do to obtain that end results. So Brisket was probably my toughest. Ah, no, it wasn't. And chicken breast. Who has grilled a bone-in chicken breast? Raise your hand. Anybody? Everybody. All right. 2 people. Nobody like chicken? Because when you cook a chicken breast, typically the chicken breast gets dry. And I feel like that's the worst thing is eating a piece of chicken breast and getting cotton mouth. I'm like, that's an awkward experience, man. It's just weird. Throw the chicken away. So I wanted to learn how to keep the moisture in the chicken. So I would say a chicken breast and brisket were my hardest 2 pieces of meat. I felt like once I mastered the chicken breast, the bone in to keep the moisture and the texture, and then the brisket, I thought I was on the right path to do okay. Y'all ever like cook a hot dog or something that gets kind of swollen? Ooh, that's the right time to pull it, right? That's the right time to pull any sausage, whether you're grilling, or depending on, I know like our Uncle Tom, he likes like burnt hot dogs and things, like to split open, die 5 times, and then give them to him, right? But for those who like appreciate, sausages or whatnot, you want them to get a little bit swollen, and that's when you're gonna get your best flavor, because everything is still intact, right? Every bite's gonna be intact, the juices are gonna be intact. When you allow a sausage or anything of the nature to split, you're losing some of those resources, some of those key ingredients that made that sausage a sausage, right? Sausage, so I don't do it down there, but I personally like grilled onions for those who like onions. I feel like onions go good on any sausage, broth, anything, But those who do not like onions, I'm told that, I don't like mustard. It sounds weird. I told you I use mustard on my stuff. I try not to think about it. But like on a sausage, a lot of folks have said like it pairs well with it, right? They say, hey, Duke, I love your sausage. I love putting some mustard and barbecue sauce on it. So for those who love barbecue sauce, essentially, which it makes sense now that I said it out loud. I'm like, ding. It makes sense because there's a mustard barbecue sauce, right? So if you pair mustard and put some barbecue sauce on a sausage or something like that, that would give you that similar taste to like a mustard sauce, right? So if you use like once again like open pit, sweet and raised, Duke's barbecue sauce, put a little mustard into that, and then you'll kind of be on your way. So all right, Mom, you want to try a little sausage? All right.
Hey, Duke.
Mom, you come over here too.
Is it actually called the Mississippi sausage, or is something else? In that
No,
name?
so it is a Mississippi smoked sausage. So it's actually like down south. That'd be considered to be links. Like so I call it Mississippi smoked sausage because it's from Mississippi. But a lot of times when you go to barbecue places and things like that, they'll say, hey, I have like these links, I have these hot links, things like that. But I just say it because Mississippi, and I like to give credit, to Mississippi as much as possible. But this would actually be considered to be a hot link. So if you go to, we don't know the ones that have it up here that I'm aware of, but there's a lot of great places that have like a lot of great like hot links. Like my buddy owns. Have you guys ever been on to Big Ass BBQ and Waukegan? Anybody been to Smoke in the city?
Good.
So like my buddies own those places, and they make good sausages, like good links or whatnot,
So can you buy it in a store around here?
Yeah, typically. So the sausages I've seen at the stores, I would say get is so the Carolinas, they make a good sausage. So whenever you see something from the Carolinas, Tennessee, like southern states, for a sausage, no offense to anybody up here, but if I see like a sausage in the store, like maybe it's in Dundee, Illinois, it's a hot link, I'm probably not gonna get it. Even if it's not. But
So where do you get that sausage?
so we actually get our food from a distributor. My granddaddy used to send me sausages, and then we started getting a little busy. So I had to kind of outsource it and figure out where to get them from. So that way, you guys are like my assistants. You become my teacher's assistants, and everybody will have the same as we leave. Enjoy that, Mom, and let me know what you think about it. And we'll take your trash too. You want to have 2 4 over there? Bob, you had this? You love smoking this stuff? Nah, I'll pass you one. Bob, you are here as a guest, my friend. So, you enjoy the smokiness to it? Yeah, so with those, but you can say you tasted smoky, you taste, did you taste any sweet?
It melts in your mouth.
It's like it's like butter. So tender. Yeah. So, but that's what you want to get. I feel like in any sausage, right? I love making beer brats, and I feel thanks, Mom. And with the beer brats that we make, I always go to have the sausage just as tender like that, you know, because I feel like that's the way you should eat any sausage, right? So with the coleslaw, like I said, I'm not into coleslaw, but who likes mayonnaise, like a mayonnaise base? Is everybody okay with a mayonnaise base? If somebody don't like, I'm not offended if people don't like coleslaw. Trust me, you know, I probably high five you. Good job for you, man. You're smart. So with that, that's a Tennessee recipe, you know, from Auntie Darlene. So my Uncle Nip, God bless his soul, he was undefeated in Memphis. He used to go against like a bunch of guys like Memphis and Maid, South Memphis. Like I went down there with Memphis and Maid some years back. Another good family out there, they owns like Cozy's Corner. They just got inducted to the BBQ Hall of Fame with Aaron Franklin from Texas. So that's kind of similar to the coleslaw that they use now in Memphis. It's like the mayonnaise base. Mississippi, I think they wing it on coleslaw, to be honest with you. Because I see some of that stuff, I'm like, that looks like a salad, man. You just give people a plate of salad, coleslaw, go home, be happy. So I took that from my auntie, because a lot of people kind of gathered towards it. But I think with coleslaw, from what I'm told, and also from a lot of my other buddies too, who are like barbecue guys, who are like friends of that nature too. And more so, people can go crazy with coleslaw because you can make a lot of different things. Like you can put, I've seen people put like raspberries in coleslaw, raisins, bacon. You know, I feel like coleslaw is that side dish that you can kind of pair it, depending on your palate, to pair with whatever main dish you're doing, you know. So have fun with coleslaw, you coleslaw lovers. All right, so how many people, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Pops.
Talk a little bit about marinades and rubs and when to time them and when to put them on.
And when to put them on?
That
Okay,
kind of
cool.
stuff. We always argue about it.
I would say, like, if you want to, are you grilling them or are you smoking them?
Smoking.
Smoking them. I would say, honestly, probably can marinate for like 2 to 4 hours, you know? Like 2 to 4 hours, get them in there. But if you're doing something kind of intimate, you want something to kind of get in there, like kind of like a roaster, like a thicker piece of meat, you know, you can go within a day or so, and that's totally fine too. But my father does like the 24 hours back in my house. I think it's a pride thing because I do the same thing he does, and I'm like, dude, man, I did this for like 2 hours, man. You wasting time, man. You're trying to drink extra beers in the garage. I'm telling Mama your secret. But yeah, I would say like 2 to 4 hours, you know, because like. But the thing with marinade, though, are you guys using like those freezer bags, like the Ziploc bags? Is that what you're marinating meat in?
Yeah.
So the trick I've learned from doing that is whatever time frame you want to do it. So say you want to do it for 2 hours, right? Is when you hit that hour mark or whatever the halfway point is, you want to flip it, right? Because that's going to allow the marinade. Because you know when you marinate something, the stuff on top, it kind of, especially when you put it in the fridge or put it on a flat surface, it kind of drizzles to the side. So the bottom is always heavily marinated, but you want to make sure you get that other, you know, side marinated too, because you don't want to put time and effort into the prep, and then your end result doesn't represent what you started at the beginning, you know. So, and then as far as rubs goes, Pops, man, it depends on the meat that you're cooking, right? So whenever I do fish, right, we're not big fish eaters inside of our household, but I've done fish for customers, and my mom loves fish and things like that. I always do a little lemon pepper. Simple is always the best. Like with my brisket, I just use black pepper and salt and shrimp. You know, we all do, and mustard. Like from Texas to Kansas City to North Carolina, South Carolina. But with that, it's not about, we're not reinventing the wheel, you know? It's like, this has been going on, but it's about learning the process that works for you, right? And what you like, and the texture that you like, and the end result that you like, you know? But it's not like, and don't get me wrong, you can play around with as much as you guys would like with food, whether, you know, like when I was in the Carolinas, we went and had a peanut butter and jelly pork rub, which was horrible. So, what are you doing, man? What are you doing? It's bad. But all in all, though, people were liking that, right? You know, people were like, hey, this is something different, Duke. And then plus they were pairing it with different beers at this brewery. But I'm old school when it comes to barbecue because I was taught by some of the greatest people in my life that I've met, you know, pit masters, and some of the best barbecue I've ever eaten in my life. And it was so simple. You know, it's kind of like riding a bike for them. But to me, it was world changing, right? I'm like, dude, how did you just do, like, I thought they were lying to me. I'm like, you can't make this with just some salt and black pepper, man. You trying to kid, man. But then after I did it, I'm like, oh, you can, you know? But by this time, I learned the process of appreciating the fat. And I think when you appreciate any meat in its entirety, that's when you get that piece where you like, you know, you want to high five everybody. But yeah, you just learn how to appreciate it, you know, and I think that's what it's about. You know, because when you put time into something, just like you do at like your 9 to 5, for those who still work or those who are retired, once did, you want to have appreciation for, at the end of the day, to know that what you've done, it was worth something, it was for something, right? And that's the same thing with cooking, right? You want to say, hey, like I spent X amount of hours on this ribs, on this chicken, on this pork, on fish, or whatever it may be. I want it to taste as good as what I anticipated it to be, you know?
Chicken wings or drumsticks, do you always just put it directly on the grate, or do you ever use like aluminum pans?
Nah, it's directly on the grate. You keep everything on the grate at first, you know, because I feel like with that, you're going to get the most smoke. You know, when you're putting it in a pan, that's starting the process of resting, right? So you're putting it in a pan, so they're already taking out all the smoke it's going to take into. If you want to get it a little bit more tender, whatever meat that may be for you guys, except for fish. You know, with fish, I just use like a little piece of like wood, just a piece of wood. You put the fish on there. You know, you never want to smoke fish on direct. You know, from what I'm told, like I don't eat fish, but what I'm told is the times I have tried it with that, the fish was a little bit dry. It lost some of the moisture to it, and I've got better results when I put it on a piece of wood. You know, I just kind of done it that way.
Wet the wood before you put the fish on it?
I have done both. I've been told that they've been good both ways.
Okay.
You know, but as far as other people that I've come across who enjoy fish and smoke fish, they've told me that they get more flavor, a little bit more smokiness to it, with kind of like marinated in the wood, or then some beer or something or whatever. You know, never do it in water. Water has no flavor, so don't do it in water. Right?
If you don't have a smoker, how do you get a smoked face?
Good question. So on a Weber grill, so this is the way we start to smoke. Well, do you ever grill? Or
Yes.
Is this charcoal or
Weber.
gas?
Yeah, just
sweet.
gas.
Gas? Okay, so what you want to do is, what's a gas grill?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I'm not big fans of gas grills. I don't know really. I don't use gas. Yeah. I mean, they're good for steaks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say like honestly, you can buy just like a little grill, right? Like you can get like a little Smoky Mountain or something of that nature, right? Whatever you have, some charcoals, because you don't need a smoker to smoke meat. But I would just align the charcoals alongside of whatever shape your grill is, right? Get them hot first and then separate them. You know, they have like a little rack, like I use a stick. You know, don't do it by hand, obviously you burn your hand. It's like, oh, I'm on fire. You can kind of get a line, like a little wall alongside of your grill, you know, and then you can put like a little, you know, like a rectangle, like little tin foil, like a little pan, or depending on how big it is, put a little pan under it, put a little water. You can, well, I don't like water. I prefer beer or like some scotch inside of it, because people don't understand. Like a lot of times, like the reason why like I like to go towards like alcohols and things like that when I'm smoking is because it takes ingredients to make alcohol, right? You know, you put in like, you know, your yeast and things like that, and that's the same thing for cooking, right? So when you cook, all those flavors that you put into the alcohol, those are going to essentially go into whatever meat you're making, right? So that's going to enhance. That's the reason why a lot of times when people say, "Oh man, like I like this, whatever." Like I love Old Style. That's my beer of choice. That's the beer. I thought you were laughing at me, man. But with that, as I prefer those with my beer brats because I like the taste of Old Style. So when I eat my beer brats, I'm like, "Oh, this tastes like an Old Style." I eat 20 of these, I'm drunk. I'm joking. But that's just the style that I prefer, you know. But I do that because of the ingredients in beer and in alcohol. You know, I feel like when you do with water, you can get you'll get texture from water, you know. But it's just going to make it tender, you know. But you're not really adding anything to it. You're not adding or nor are you taking away, because essentially with water, when it starts to evaporate, it creates steam, right? So that's also going to break down the process and break down the meat for you too, right? But it's not going to add anything to it, you know. So just by doing just a little bit of water, or just doing like wine, like wine's good too, you know, for her cooking too, because it's good for meat. So good question like this, because you get reactions from cooking, right? I think music and food is what connects us all together, right? Because we all got a tune, whatever that tune may be, that we snap our fingers and tap our feet to, right? And we all got some food source that we all take in, right? Whether you're a vegan or vegetarian, you like pork, you like chicken, you like beef. So I like to connect in that moment with you, you know? And that allows me to connect, you know? Because like, if you don't eat pork, but you like chicken, and I like chicken, so then I want to make the best chicken to my ability for you, so we can connect that way, you know? So, good question. Yeah, all right, well, I have a question for you guys. Before I start making everybody's food, it'll be really quick. It'll take a couple minutes. Is everybody okay with chicken, sausage, rib tips, and coleslaw? Cool. Is anybody allergic to dairy allergics or gluten or anything like that? Cool. All right. Cool. Does anybody like chocolate chip cookies? Cool. Well, once again, thanks everybody for coming. I really appreciate it. Yeah, this is really cool. So, you know, once again, my name is Duke, and thanks for recording. And hope you guys enjoyed the food. And if you guys have been to the caboose, you know, thanks for coming. And if you haven't been to the caboose, feel free to come on by and tell them you met a guy, you know.